Pernice from the Norman Group.
So, using eye tracking and web usability. So I'm just going to say, first of all, I don't think that eye tracking is something you should never do. I actually like eye tracking quite a lot, and you can learn a lot from eye tracking. It exposes a lot, like the heat maps are really kind of a sexy thing that can get people excited. Also the technology is sort of awe-inspiring. Geeks love it. So you know, like back in the early 90s when I first started doing usability, when we built our first lab, you know, all the geeky people would go in and like want to mess with the mixers. This is sort of the same idea. Like it's just something that gets people sort of excited. And there's something to be said for that propaganda to get people interested in usability. And this is one more vehicle. That's positive. You also, let's see, the expense, like spending the money, the time on the actual hardware and preparing the studies, running the studies, analyzing, all of that can really show that management has made some sort of commitment to usability. So these are, I think, really positive things about eye tracking. And then there are a lot of things you can learn, and just a few of the things that we've been learning. I think big things are the idea of exhaustive review. If you don't do eye tracking, all you know is that a person is spending a lot of time on a page. You don't know what they're looking at, or if they're kind of getting what they want, or they're really actually just looking again and again and not learning anything and having a hard time. So this is something that, you can't find that without eye tracking. The idea of obstacle course, a page that's designed like an obstacle course where people actually skirt around things that are not attractive to them and find ways to just not even give it a fixation. That's something that you'd never know without eye tracking. Magnetism, checking out people's body parts, and not just people's, mammals, it's like there are dogs that people check out, it's just men and women alike, and that's just a point of interest. Does that help us develop our software? I don't know, but use it how you may. And reading patterns, we all have, found ourselves, read other sources, we say the F pattern, but there are other patterns, the spotted pattern, commitment pattern, lots of ways that people can read. And so, eye tracking has merits, definitely, absolutely. But I think, first of all, saying that any usability method is absolutely necessary, I'm not even positive that that's your stance, Rob, but if it is, saying that any method is absolute is not a good thing to do. But, one of the traits of a great usability professional is to look at the situation and decide, what does this need? So, insert any method here, and I will say the same statement pretty much. Also, I think that most major usability issues can be uncovered with traditional methods. That's the thing. Like, I think eye tracking adds to it. It's a complement, but you don't need it. So, things that we see, like these usability improvements when we do our return on investment kind of research, we found that most usability findings are collected through basic usability studies. And this is a questionnaire that we did and some research with 66 different web studies. Not a huge sample, but people just doing traditional usability studies who are finding hundreds of percent improvement just with basic usability studies and no eye tracking. This graph excludes anything that had over 1,000% improvement, and there were, in fact, ones that had that. No eye tracking. Also, it's pretty, this cheap way of doing it, a few users, you can still find many usability problems, and each iterative round of testing that you do, if you're finding 50, the average at 50 usability problems, that's often enough. Like, what are you going to do with 1,000 problems, which is the kind of minutiae you find with eye tracking, which is good. It's good to find it, but if you're going to spend a lot of time analyzing that information, can you deal with it? Which is kind of the next point. It's really all that most teams can do is to keep up with just doing the traditional methods. Like, all they can do is the traditional method and keep up with those findings. If you collect more and more and more findings, can you deal with those? Can most teams deal with them? That's the question. Now, I'm not proposing that we strive to be mediocre and we don't find things because we can't deal with it, but I think that the expense involved and the time involved in doing it, I think we should pause before we decide to do eye tracking. So here's a survey of 217 participants from our usability week over years, and it's just how many times, these are people who pay, come to our conference. I don't really know what it costs a day, but it's around $800 a day. These are people who are committed to usability. They're sending people to our conference, yet they're not using traditional methods all that much. Who's going to be able to use eye tracking? So, you know, just server traffic analysis, it's like the average is 15 times a year, basically. Search log analysis, 11. Basic user testing, 4 times a year. Surveys, 3 times a year. Heuristic evaluations, the easiest thing you can possibly do. You're only doing it 3 times a year. And these are committed people. So how can we possibly throw this anvil of eye tracking on them? Eye tracking studies are expensive and time consuming. And I'm not talking about just the equipment, I'm talking about especially the analysis. So here's the basics of what we think a general user test costs, about $5,600 US, basic test for users. A paper prototype test actually costs a little more, we find, because it takes longer because you're actually doing the design and doing a paper prototype. Am I taking too long? What do you think?
No, I was thinking, I wish I could bill 156,000
Do it. Do it. You have another source that says it's all right. No, I mean, this is what it costs. Field studies, about $2,800. Now, the eye tracking, this is basically showing that it costs a lot of money to have data storage, to rent the equipment, the amount of time to actually prepare it. So you notice the difference between preparing a typical usability test like 10 hours. A paper prototype, you're doing the design, so it's 30 hours. But an eye tracking test, you really have to go through these websites and figure out how they work. Is this going to work with the eye tracker? 20 hours, everything you're doing, you have to create a stimulus. I mean, there's really a lot of work involved. And you have to name them such a way that on the fly, while you're doing your tasks, you can choose it and quickly get the user going. It's like a huge layer in addition to all the other stuff that you're doing when you're facilitating a study. There's a pretty big layer. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's a lot of work. And for people who are new at usability, it's almost insurmountable, I think. And the things that make the eye tracker just go haywire are amazing. Like really, a user leans to the left, a user leans back, a user leans forward. They pick up the tasks. They do this all the time. And you find yourself, and you say, excuse me, could you just lower that? You know, and they think you're asleep. You tell them before, it's like, you know, we have to have a clear way, and you know, if you're drinking your coffee or holding the mug up, I'm gonna ask you to put it down. And they're like, yeah, okay. You know, it's like just this additional thing that is kind of, you can get by it, absolutely, but it's I guess if you're newer at this, it can be trouble. So the idea of what your budget share should be, and these are some research studies that have been done since '71. Basically, the idea of how much of your budget should be attributed, your development budget, how much should be attributed to usability work. And 71, Shackle says it's 3%. That was when, you know, 71. This is when, what is usability, right? Then we get into 89, where it's becoming far more prevalent, and we have the recommendation by Wasserman to do 5%. Then Jacob Nielsen did his research in '93, and he says a little more, 6%. Then Nielsen Normal Group did another study, 13% we suggested in 2001. Then IBM suggests 10%. That's the median anyway. 10. So we're kind of hovering in the 10-ish range now. And then now our recommendation based on this is we recommend 10% of your budget share should be attributed to usability activities. So if you did eye tracking, that would suck it up. I mean, gone in one eye tracking test, basically. I don't think that's the best way to do iterative design. So it's a time drain. One reason it's a time drain is if you do eye tracking in such a way that it's helpful and logical, what you really want to do is rarely, if ever, just open a page and say, look at this user, or do a task, here's the page. What you really want to do is have it be the fluid, organic way that people work. And by doing that, you're going to hit websites, you're going to hit pages that the eye tracker can't really deal extremely well with. And in fact, what happens is the system starts to almost visibly shimmy, and it crashes frequently. You lose a lot of data. And you also have to, be really cautious that you save in between tasks and things like that, or you lose the eye tracking, which, in a video session when you've taken really good notes, you can kind of deal with that. But in an eye tracking session, you can't, because every second there's at least, 4 fixations about. And you're supposed to remember all that or take all those notes as you're typing the quotes, you're keeping track of the task. You've got to go back to the gaze replays. And if you lose it, you're in big trouble, basically.